So here's where we get into. So then, this was also a really good tip. Like, believe it or not, I just never did this. But they were talking about how, like, when you're designing your characters, to get them all in a lineup. So what I wound up doing was putting them all in a lineup here and getting their heights and body sizes correct against one another and seeing what like my cast of characters looks like as, you know, the cast of characters. So another thing too, if your character was designed well, it should be recognizable by its silhouette, right? So I kept this in mind too. And like everything about your character tells something about it, right? Like the colors that they wear, the color of their hair, the color of their eyes, the facial expressions they have in their images, you know, like all this stuff tells the story too. Also, there's a body shape language that's going on here. And I found that this worked really well for me, I think. But they're saying if you have a cast of characters that you should be able to like determine what shape they are, right? You've got squares, you've got triangles, and you've got circles. And so what I mean by that is, so you've got squares, right? And when you look at your character, you should be able to kind of figure out like what's going on, right? So we got squares, triangles, and circles. And so at the time, all of my guys and gals were all kind of looking the same, you know? And so what I went through is I was like, all right, so I kept this in mind. I was like, all right, triangles and squares. And so what I found was that Merrick was very much had triangle stuff going on. That stood out right away. So I leaned into that, right? So even his pose accentuates this triangle stuff, right? And then even when you get even more into it, right, you're going to see more triangles. Now my problem with Merrick was that, or actually I'll come back to that because that's later stuff, right? So we've got Merrick, who's a very triangle guy, right? And what I found was that Duncargo was the same way, and that my girls were all very, very oval. And so what they're saying is they're like, you know, you want to have at least one of each, right, to have like a dynamic cast of characters. And so like we went back to the whole like, you know, Duncargo's this wandery, strong, friendly brawler thing. It just made sense to have Duncargo go with some squares. So what we did was we squared them up. And then even in our minor stuff, we worked with squares. Even his fists are pretty blocky. And even the way that his kind of face is designed here is sort of a square. Because part of this shape language is that the different shapes communicate different things, right? So like, so what's a triangle, right? It's edgy. It's got edges. It's got points. It's got, you know, so usually somebody kind of, you know, quick or aggressive or, you know, sharp-tongued or sarcastic or, you know, like somebody like edgy parts of personality come off really well when you're working with triangles, right? And then so what are the squares are what? They're more like stability, solidness, something large and like, you know, just wide and like it's like a square, it's like a wall, you know, like so we've got Merrick's character he's a thief and you know he's kind of jaded and he's, you know, upset about how things went and stuff, and so he's kind of sharp around the edges. And then you've got Duncargo who, you know, become more squared. He's more squared off, you know, but he's still got these little bits of, you know, of edge to him. And then the circle is more like softness, gracefulness, things of this nature, friendliness. And so, as we came in here to design, to redesign the girls, we were like, all right, so what kind of shapes we're looking at here, right? So our main shape, Vanessa, right? She was originally like this oval, right? And she is supposed to be sort of friendly. Like that is part of, she's, you know, Merrick's friend and, you know, but she's very, like, she's kind of, you know, she's been around. She knows what's going on. You know, she's sort of no nonsense. So what we did here was we went with a dual shape for Vanessa because she's more of a complex character. We went with a circle triangle. But if you look, what we wound up doing is we wound up overlaying the circle over a secondary triangle, right? So we're looking at something like this. And the reason why I felt comfortable doing that is because she's a complex character. And if I did it right, she should come off as sort of big sister, girl next door kind of friend, and, you know, just someone that's like close to you, like someone who may have edges to others, but to you, if you were within her circle, she's a circle to you, right? And that's why we also went with, you'll find circles in her details. Okay. But so then we got to Elucidel and Natasha. And again, we had to go through, this was a pain, man. This was a huge pain because there's so much censorship in with like the public AI generators and stuff like that, that doing something like something as simple as getting high heels is like deemed not safe for work, you know, the kind of stuff. And so I had to really get into some stuff to get it to like generate this. But like there's a reason. Like, this isn't just because, oh, she looks hot in like, you know, thick high heels. Again, this is the terrain and stuff that we're talking about. This is the world these people live in. We've got a overall oval shape, but if you'll notice our secondary patterns here, we go with squares. So let me go with squares here, right? So for Natasha, what we wound up doing is, so as you see now, of course, Natasha and Merrick are related, and while Natasha is more open, she is also more complex than it might come off as. And so for her, we did a similar thing as with Vanessa, where we went with like a circle triangle. And then, as you'll see here, we reinforce that with our secondary shapes. All right. So I'm starting to understand, the more I study this stuff, I'm starting to get why characters look the way they do, right? Like, for example, like, is it necessary that she be in this kind of stance, right? She's like popping her head out. She looks kind of sexy, you know. She's not even really like, you know, a sexy character per se. She's like kind of goofy. But by having her hips like this, I've introduced this circle shape. You know what I'm saying? And so, like I said, like the more I study like this like character design and all this kind of stuff, the more it makes sense as to why artists do the things they do. You know? Like, it's not just like, oh, she's hot. It's like, no, like all of this stuff tells you something about her. Right? And so this is what we were looking at, right, initially. So I was like, okay, so I'm feeling better about my setup now. But there was a problem initially, before I finished these out, was that when we switched over to the silhouette, here's a good example, right? Merrick doesn't really stand out that much. That could be anybody. Who is that? That's like a pirate, maybe? Or something, you know? So here's what we were looking at with the silhouettes, right? Now, I got to take into account that I know who they are, right? Like, I know who they are right away because I've been working with them for so long. So I've got to be a little hard on myself here to feel like I'm getting a proper thing. So I feel like Natasha's looks pretty good, right? I feel like Elucidel's looks pretty good. But these three, that could be anybody, right? Like, I don't know who this is, really. That's some girl. And that could be like what is he, a swashbuckler, a pirate, like, you know, somebody, maybe some kind of thief, something, I don't know. So we went back to our characters, right? So one of the really handy things that I learned about this particular little problem, using your shape language and applying it to your silhouettes, right? And one of the cool things about working with animation, right, like versus like live action stuff with like real people, is that both with like the appearance of and the motion of, if you're like actually physically animating in 2D or 3D, you want to exaggerate. They're not supposed to be realistic. You want to exaggerate the parts of the characters that tell their story. But in a silhouette, how do you do that? Like, it's just black, right? It's just like their shadow. But it's not so much a problem as a missed opportunity. All right? Because so what I wound up doing was I went in here and I was like, okay, so if we take our shape language now, and I need to get just a break. You want breaks in the silhouette, and specific, like just somewhere that's kind of unique to the character, right? And now remembering that this is just going to be a black blob, you're going to have to rely on shapes. So it only makes sense that you come back to your shape language, right? So now we're on layer 4 here. Boom. So this is where we can get into some of those secondary or more tertiary, right? Like third, right? So we've got our primary shape of the characters, right? So he's triangle, she's like circle triangle, he's square, she's circle, and she's circle triangle, right? And then so those are our primary shapes. Our secondary shapes for them are, you know, he's again triangle, she's got circle, he's square, she's square, and he's circle, right? So what can we do to pop out this silhouette, right? So for Duncargo, like we said here, is what did we lean into? We're like, all right, we know he's an elf, or he's a half elf, but his ears weren't long initially. But so let's go ahead and lean into his elf heritage, right? Let's say that Danji do have elf ears. So this was what also led into him being larger too, and like with the facial hair, is because we don't want him confused with actual elves. He's a half elf, so he's got facial hair. He's got a very like human, like rugged build, you know. But so, and again, like I said, we wanted to get those underlying personality traits out, so we went with triangles, right? So boom, he's got the elf ear triangle. And then what I did was initially his cloak was like wrapped around. What we did was we unwrapped his cloak, and I'll have to edit this a little bit myself. It's supposed to be more like flared out, but you have this triangle of fabric that juts out in the other direction, right? And so that's going to break up our silhouette, right? Boom, there's a triangle that juts out there. Boom, there's a triangle that juts out there, right? And so then we come to Vanessa, and so now we know that like she's friendly, but she's also got an edge. But one of the things that makes her so complex as a character too is that she's also a source of stability for Merrick, and she's very interested in stability and security for herself. It only made sense for Vanessa that we break up her silhouette with some squares, right? And you don't want to go overboard with everything. Like, you want to focus things, right? So then for Merrick is pretty much just, he's triangled out, man. Let's throw some triangles in here. And so now technically you'll notice too that I didn't actually have to do this. This kind of happened on accident. But now Alesidel, like I said, her character had come off kind of wrong because of how she looked and like some of her dialogue. So she's a circle square, right? So she's friendly and stable and like kind of like calm and all this stuff. But she does have a little bit of a bite, a little bit of an edge. Like, she can lose her temper. And also, if you've played the game, you know that she has a secret that would give her a triangle, right? With aggression and stuff. So what we find here is that we get a nice triangle right smack in the middle. And likewise, while we have the circle here because of the way her hips are and everything, what we've done with our little lady Natasha here is shown that, like Merrick, she's got a bit of an edgy side too. It's just not as pronounced. It doesn't come off as much. So we've got triangles here. So this was what our shape stuff's looking like, right? So now what does it look like when we put all this into practice here? Boom. Now suddenly we've added just a little bit of character here. Now we've got Duncargo's little triangle points that come off there, right? We've got his squares, but now he's also got these triangles. right? You can see in her silhouette, there's the circle up here, you know? So you almost go circle, square, triangle, and then this would be an oval, right? And then like square at the bottom. And then her, like you can see this very circular energy right here in her silhouette, right? But there's this triangular kind of stance and almost like a right here, right? Right? So just by looking at these silhouettes, you know, if I were to have to get personality off, I'm like, this guy seems like he's kind of laid back and cool and edgy. This girl seems like she's got like her arms crossed or something like that, and her hips are out, but she's standing like kind of authoritative or like, you know, matter of fact. This guy's like kind of just a blob. Like, I feel like maybe like Doug Gargo's stance could use some work. I need like a better stance for him. But I feel like Alessadell's and Natasha's are excellent. Like, this looks like somebody graceful. This looks like somebody like, you know, little sister energy. Like maybe like she's like kind of a little firecracker kind of thing, you know? And so this was all really useful information that led me down the roads that I went to enhance the design of my characters. And so once I got them all kind of situated, what I wound up doing was they're saying, so you wanted to see what they looked like in a lineup, right? But that you didn't want to just stop right there, because that there's still sort of ways that you can kind of lead yourself astray. You also want to see what they look like on backgrounds, right? Like what are they going to look like while they're out and about, you know? I did do stuff like this, right, to try to kind of see what they would look like in their environments, if you will. Don't stop at just your lineup. Don't stop at just putting them on a thing. Put them in groups too. Let's see what they look like together in different groups, right? And so what I did was like, so they're supposed to be friends, right? So, you know, I put the two together, like the two of them standing there together. That looks right, you know? That looks pretty legit. Cargo and Alessadell are supposed to be things, so like, you know, them standing there together. The ladies, you know, all doing their thing. But so in this way, you want to just kind of see what everyone looks like together, you know?